The evening was heavy with an almost tangible stillness, the kind that lingers just before a storm. Scented candles flickered on the dining table, their soft glow tracing the contours of my husband's face as he smiled at his brother. "Emily, this is Jason," Sam said, gesturing toward the man standing by the doorway. His voice carried the warmth of familiarity, but there was something electric in the air as my eyes met Jason's. He was taller than Sam, his presence filling the room effortlessly. There was a sharpness to his features, softened only by a smirk that teetered between charm and mischief. "Nice to meet you," Jason said, his voice smooth, his eyes holding mine for a beat too long. I managed a polite nod, but something inside me stirred, a sensation I hadn't felt in years. The dinner was uneventful on the surface. Sam talked about work. Jason made jokes that had us all laughing. But beneath the laughter, I felt his gaze linger. Subtle, deliberate. It wasn't overt, but it was there, an unspoken challenge. I couldn't help but notice the ease with which he moved through the room, as though he belonged here. It contrasted sharply with the predictability of my life with Sam. Not that I was unhappy. Sam was reliable, steady, a constant in the chaos of life. But there were cracks, small, insidious voids that I had long ignored. Later that night, I found myself restless. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, the cool tile beneath my feet grounding me. Voices drifted in from the living room, Sam and Jason talking, their words barely audible. I hesitated, then moved closer, staying hidden behind the corner. "I'm just saying," Jason's voice was tinged with amusement. "Marriage doesn't mean you stop being interesting to people. It's all about confidence. If you know how to keep someone intrigued, you can make anyone look twice." Sam chuckled, brushing it off. "You've always been the charmer." Jason's reply was quieter, but I caught it. "It's not about charm, Sam. It's about knowing what someone needs before they do." A shiver ran down my spine. Was that a veiled message? I couldn't tell, but his words stayed with me as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I felt Jason's presence before I saw him. He was in the backyard, sipping coffee, the morning sun casting long shadows over the patio. I stepped outside, my hesitation masked by a casual smile. "Good morning," I said, my voice steady despite the flutter in my chest. "Morning," he replied, his eyes scanning me briefly before returning to his cup. "Didn't mean to take over your space." "You're not," I said quickly, too quickly. "It's nice to have company." He smiled, a knowing smile that felt like he could see right through me. Well, I aimed to please. The conversation stayed light, banter about the weather, Sam's obsessive work habits. But there was an undertone to it, something unsaid, yet undeniably present. I found myself laughing at his jokes, the kind of laugh that comes easily, without thought. As the day unfolded, I caught myself glancing at him more than I should. The way he moved, the ease with which he navigated life, it was intoxicating in its own way. And yet, guilt gnawed at me. Sam was everything a woman could ask for, a devoted partner, a solid foundation. Why then did I feel this pull toward Jason? It wasn't love, not even infatuation. It was curiosity, a dangerous, inexplicable curiosity. That night, as I lay in bed next to Sam, his breathing steady in the darkness, Jason's words echoed in my mind. Knowing what someone needs before they do, what did I need? And why did it feel like Jason already knew the answer? The sun was just beginning to rise, its light seeping through the horizon like spilled honey. The air was crisp, invigorating, as I returned from my morning run, my pulse still racing, though I wasn't sure if it was from the exertion or something else entirely. As I stepped into the backyard, I found Jason there, lounging with a cup of coffee, his feet propped up on the edge of the patio table. His relaxed posture made it seem as if he had been living here for years, not a mere day. "Morning," he called out, his voice carrying that same teasing lilt that I was beginning to recognize as distinctly his. "Morning," I replied, breathless, though I'd blame the run if asked. I leaned against the edge of the deck, letting the cool breeze brush against my skin. "You're up early." He raised an eyebrow. "And you're already running? That's dedication." I shrugged, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "It helps me clear my head." Jason leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What's cluttering it?" It was such a simple question, but the way he asked it felt anything but. I hesitated, feeling the weight of his gaze, before deciding to deflect. "Just the usual: work, life, figuring out what to make for dinner. Nothing too exciting." He chuckled, the sound rich and effortless. "Sounds like you've got it all under control." "Hardly," I said, smiling despite myself. There was something disarming about him, something that made me want to linger even though I knew I shouldn't. "What about you? How's life as the free-spirited brother?" He smirked, swirling his coffee lazily. "Free-spirited? That's a generous way to put it. Let's just say I'm figuring things out too." The conversation flowed easily after that, slipping into light banter about Sam's quirks and Jason's past misadventures. It felt normal, comfortable, but there was an edge to it, a faint hum of energy beneath the surface that I couldn't ignore. When I finally excused myself to head inside, I felt his eyes follow me, and my skin prickled under their weight. The day passed in a blur of chores and routines. By evening, we were getting ready for a small dinner with friends. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the zipper on the back of my dress, but it refused to budge. "Need some help?" Jason's voice came from the doorway, startling me. He leaned casually against the frame, his expression unreadable. I hesitated, torn between brushing him off and accepting. "It's just stuck," I said finally, turning slightly to show him. He stepped closer, his movements slow and deliberate. His fingers brushed against my back as he reached for the zipper, and I stiffened at the unexpected contact. The room felt smaller, the air heavier as his hand lingered just a fraction too long. "There," he murmured, his voice low, as the zipper finally gave way. His fingers didn't move immediately, and I felt the warmth of his touch through the thin fabric. Our eyes met in the mirror, and in that moment, something shifted. Before I could think, before I could even breathe, his lips were on mine. It wasn't planned or gentle, it was impulsive, electric, and it sent a jolt through me that I couldn't have anticipated. My hands instinctively gripped the edge of the dresser as his hand moved to my waist, anchoring me. It lasted only a second, 2, maybe 3, before reality crashed down on us. I pulled away first, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. "We shouldn't." I started, but my voice faltered as I avoided his gaze. "Emily," he began, his tone softer now, almost apologetic, but I shook my head. "Just, let's forget this happened," I said quickly, retreating toward the door. He didn't follow, didn't argue, but the look in his eyes as I glanced back stayed with me long after I left the room. The dinner went on as planned, the familiar hum of conversation filling the air, but I could hardly focus. My mind replayed the moment again and again, the sensation of his lips, the weight of his hand. I sat across from him at the table, avoiding his gaze, but acutely aware of his every movement. Sam, oblivious as ever, laughed at some joke Jason made, his face lighting up with the kind of joy that twisted my stomach with guilt. And yet, beneath the guilt, there was something else. Something I didn't want to name. As I lay in bed that night, next to a husband who trusted me completely, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had crossed a line I didn't even know existed. And worse, I wasn't sure I wanted to go back. The days after the kiss felt like walking a tightrope over a void I couldn't see the bottom of. Every step seemed fraught with danger, every glance over my shoulder filled with the possibility of meeting his eyes again. I avoided Jason as much as I could, but the memory of that fleeting moment clung to me like smoke, impossible to wash away. I focused my attention on Sam, throwing myself into the routines of our life with renewed determination. That evening, as he came home from work, I greeted him with a warm smile and a kiss on the cheek. He looked surprised, but pleasantly so. "Everything okay?" he asked, loosening his tie as he dropped his bag by the door. Of course I lied, though my voice betrayed none of the turmoil beneath. "I thought we could have dinner together, just the two of us." His face lit up, a reminder of why I fell in love with him in the first place. Sam was steady, reliable, and kind. But as we sat down to eat, the space between us felt vast. He told me about his day, his voice animated as he recounted a funny story from the construction site, but my mind wandered. I forced myself to focus, to nod and laugh in all the right places, but something in me had shifted. Later that night, I tried to rekindle the intimacy we once shared. As I lay beside him, I reached for his hand, letting my fingers trail over his. He turned to me, his eyes soft with affection. "Emily," he murmured, his voice low, "I've missed this." So had I, or at least, I thought I had. But as he kissed me, his touch familiar yet strangely distant, I realized with a pang that it wasn't enough. The connection I longed for was there in theory, but it felt hollow, like an echo of something that used to exist. Jason, on the other hand, seemed entirely unaffected. He moved through the house with the same ease as before, his charm as effortless as ever. But every time we crossed paths, his eyes lingered just a moment too long, a silent reminder of what had happened. It wasn't overt. He wasn't reckless. If anything, his calm demeanor only heightened the tension between us. One morning, I passed him in the hallway. He stepped aside to let me through, his hand brushing mine for the briefest moment. I flinched as though burned, but he said nothing, just offered a small, knowing smile before continuing on his way. It was maddening how he could be so composed when I felt like I was unraveling. A few days later, Sam announced over breakfast that he wanted to host a family dinner. "Just us," he said, "to reconnect. It feels like we haven't had much time together lately." The suggestion was innocent enough, but it sent a ripple of panic through me. Sitting across from Jason at the same table, with Sam none the wiser. The thought alone was suffocating, but I forced myself to nod in agreement. The evening arrived, and the atmosphere was warm and convivial. Sam had gone all out, grilling steaks and opening a bottle of wine he'd been saving. Jason joined in with his usual charm, cracking jokes that had Sam laughing so hard he nearly spilled his drink. I played my part, smiling and laughing along, but every shared glance with Jason felt like a spark waiting to ignite. At one point, Sam excused himself to grab something from the kitchen, leaving Jason and me alone at the table. The silence that followed was deafening. I focused on my plate, refusing to look at him, but I could feel his eyes on me. "You're quiet tonight," he said finally, his tone casual but laced with meaning. I kept my gaze fixed downward. "Just tired." Jason leaned back in his chair, the faintest hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "You know, you're not as good at pretending as you think you are." I snapped my head up, my heart pounding. "Jason, don't." "Don't what?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Don't acknowledge what's already there?" Before I could respond, Sam returned, oblivious to the tension hanging in the air. He poured more wine, toasting to family with a broad grin, while I swallowed my guilt along with the drink. That night, as I lay awake beside Sam, I felt the weight of everything I was trying to suppress. Jason's words echoed in my mind, daring me to confront truths I wasn't ready to face. The distance between Sam and me had never felt greater, but it was the pull toward Jason that terrified me the most. The beach stretched endlessly before me, the waves rolling in with a rhythmic crash, as if trying to wash away the chaos in my mind. It was late afternoon, and the sun hung low in the sky, painting the horizon with strokes of gold and amber. My sneakers sank into the soft sand with each step, the salty breeze brushing against my skin like a whisper. I had come here to think, or perhaps to escape. The walls of the house felt too close, suffocating, with Jason's presence a constant reminder of the line I had crossed. The guilt was a weight I couldn't shake, but underneath it was something else, something darker, more dangerous. As I turned a corner near the dunes, I saw him. Jason. He was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his gaze fixed on the waves. For a moment, I thought I was imagining him, but when he turned and saw me, his expression shifted into that familiar, easy smirk. "Emily," he called out, his voice carrying over the sound of the surf. "Didn't expect to see you here." I stopped, my chest tightening. "What are you doing here?" He shrugged, taking a few steps closer. "Just walking." Needed to clear my head. His answer was too convenient, too perfectly timed. I narrowed my eyes. "You followed me, didn't you?" "Don't flatter yourself," he said, though the amusement in his tone was unmistakable. "This beach isn't yours, is it?" I turned away, trying to ignore the heat rising in my cheeks. "Well, I came here to be alone." "Fair enough," he said, but instead of leaving, he sat down on the sand, as if claiming his spot. I sighed, frustrated, but a part of me couldn't bring myself to walk away. Against my better judgment, I sat down a few feet away, keeping my eyes on the horizon. For a while, we were silent, the sound of the waves filling the space between us. Finally, he broke the silence. "You're avoiding me." I tensed, my fingers digging into the sand. "What do you expect, Jason?" "After what happened." "After what happened," he interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "You've been acting like it didn't, like it's something to be erased." "Because it should be," I shot back, turning to face him. "It was a mistake, Jason. You and I both know that." He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "You keep telling yourself that, but it's not the kiss you're running from, Emily. It's what it meant." I scoffed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "What it meant? It didn't mean anything. You're just, you're playing with me, like you always do. That's who you are, Jason." He didn't flinch at my words. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his expression softening. "You think I'm playing with you because it's easier than admitting the truth. But the truth, Emily, is that you're scared. You're scared of being who you really are." I opened my mouth to argue, but no words came. He wasn't wrong, and that terrified me more than anything he could have said. The sun dipped lower, the sky awash with shades of pink and orange. The silence stretched between us, heavy with everything unsaid. Jason shifted closer, his hand brushing against mine, tentative but deliberate. My breath hitched at the contact, the warmth of his skin sending a shiver through me. "Emily," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the waves. "Tell me to stop, and I will." I couldn't. I didn't want to. He leaned in slowly, his movements careful, as though giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. His lips met mine, and the world seemed to fall away. It wasn't like the first kiss, impulsive and charged. This one was slower, deeper, as if he were trying to convey everything he couldn't say aloud. When we finally broke apart, the sun had almost disappeared below the horizon, casting the beach in a dim, golden glow. I stared at him, my chest rising and falling with unsteady breaths. "This is wrong," I whispered, though the words felt hollow. "Maybe," he said, his voice steady. "But it doesn't feel that way, does it?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I turned back to the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore in a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. The line between right and wrong blurred with every moment I spent near him, and I knew, deep down, that this wasn't the end. The house grew quieter as Sam immersed himself deeper into work, his long hours leaving me alone with my thoughts, or worse, with Jason. The tension between us had reached a breaking point on the beach, and now, it felt as though we had crossed into uncharted territory, one we couldn't turn back from. It started with fleeting moments, a brush of hands as we passed each other in the hallway, a shared glance that lingered too long, whispers exchanged in rooms where Sam's presence was a distant hum. Every interaction was a step further into the abyss, and neither of us seemed inclined to stop. One afternoon, while Sam was out at a meeting, I found myself in the living room, the air heavy with anticipation. Jason entered without a word, his eyes locking onto mine with a familiarity that felt both thrilling and damning. He didn't ask if it was okay to sit beside me. He just did, his proximity sending a shiver down my spine. "You've been avoiding me again?" he said finally, his tone light but probing. "I'm trying to keep things normal," I replied, though even I could hear the hollowness in my words. Jason leaned back, his arm draped casually over the back of the couch. "Define normal? Pretending nothing's happening? Lying to yourself?" I glared at him, my pulse quickening. "And what about you? You're just playing your usual game, aren't you?" He didn't respond immediately, his gaze steady, unflinching. Then, with a faint smirk, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. He handed it to me, his fingers brushing mine as he did. "What's this?" I asked, suspicious. "Open it," he said simply. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, a tiny charm dangling from its chain. It was understated, elegant, and undeniably personal. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Jason's smirk softened into something more genuine. "Because I wanted you to have something that's just ours. Something you can wear close to your heart." His words were like a match to dry kindling. The air between us ignited, and before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my lips finding his in a desperate, unspoken plea. His hand slid to the nape of my neck, pulling me closer, the kiss deep and consuming. The weeks that followed became a blur of stolen moments and mounting lies. I told Sam I had taken up running again to clear my head, but instead, I spent those hours with Jason. We'd retreat to quiet corners of the house, our time together fueled by an urgency that made every second feel both precious and forbidden. But as our secret deepened, so did Sam's suspicions. One evening, as I returned from one of my supposed runs, I found him waiting for me in the kitchen, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. "You've been running a lot lately," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes searching. "It helps," I replied quickly, forcing a smile. "You know how I get when things feel overwhelming." Sam nodded slowly, but his gaze lingered on me for a moment too long before he turned away. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized he was beginning to notice the cracks in the facade I had so carefully constructed. Jason, of course, seemed unfazed by the growing risk. One afternoon, as we sat together in the backyard, he leaned back in his chair, the sunlight catching in his eyes. "You're overthinking again," he said, his voice calm and steady. "Sam's not stupid," I snapped, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "He'll figure it out." Jason leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "And what if he does? Are you going to keep running, Emily? Or are you going to face what you really want?" His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I wanted something I couldn't name, something that Jason seemed to embody with every glance, every touch. "You make it sound so simple," I said bitterly, but Jason just smiled, reaching for my hand. "It is," he said, tracing his thumb over my knuckles. "You just have to stop pretending." As much as I hated to admit it, a part of me didn't want to pretend anymore. But the thought of what I could lose, the life I had built, the trust I had with Sam, was a weight I couldn't ignore. Jason's hand tightened around mine, his presence steady and unwavering. "You don't have to decide now," he said, his voice softer. "But when you do, you know where to find me." The bracelet on my wrist felt heavier than ever, a constant reminder of the choice I wasn't ready to make. The day started like any other, with Sam rushing out the door for an early meeting. I lingered in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and trying to steady the restless energy in my chest. The bracelet Jason had given me sat snugly on my wrist, its silver charm catching the light every time I moved. It had become a quiet constant in my life, something I wore as if it was a part of me, though I knew deep down how dangerous it was to keep it so openly. By the time Sam returned that evening, the air in the house felt different. He seemed more observant, his gaze lingering on me longer than usual. I shrugged it off as paranoia until he came to sit across from me after dinner, his expression unusually serious. "That's a nice bracelet," he said, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "I don't think I've seen it before." My heart skipped a beat. I looked down at the bracelet as if noticing it for the first time, fumbling for an answer. "Oh, this? It's, just something I picked up a while ago." Sam tilted his head, studying me. "Really? Funny, I usually notice those things." I forced a smile, my palms growing clammy. "You must have just missed it. I wear it all the time." He didn't press further, but the way he watched me as I busied myself with cleaning up made my stomach churn. The bracelet felt heavier than ever, its presence a glaring reminder of the web of lies I'd woven. The storm hit later that night. I was in the bedroom, folding laundry, when Sam walked in. He was holding something in his hand, his movements deliberate and slow. As he stepped closer, I realized what it was. One of Jason's shirts, crumpled and unmistakably out of place in our room. "Care to explain this?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with a tension that made my chest tighten. I froze, the laundry slipping from my hands. "That's Jason's," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Sam said, his eyes narrowing. "Why is it in our bedroom?" My mind raced, scrambling for an excuse, but nothing came. The truth sat like a boulder in my throat, impossible to swallow or speak. "Sam, it's not what you think," I started. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how hollow they sounded. "Not what I think," he snapped, his voice rising. "Then tell me, Emily, because right now, it looks like my wife has something going on with my brother." The weight of his accusation crashed over me, and I could feel the dam I'd been holding back begin to break. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes as I finally met his gaze. "Sam, I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you." His face fell, a mix of disbelief and pain washing over him. "So it's true?" I nodded, unable to look away from the devastation in his eyes. "It wasn't supposed to happen," I said quickly. "I didn't plan this, Sam, but things between us, they haven't been right for a long time." He stared at me, his jaw tight. "And that's your excuse?" "Because what? I've been busy with work? Because I didn't shower you with attention every second of the day?" "It's not about that," I said, my voice breaking. "It's not about what you did or didn't do. It's about how I've felt, like I've been going through the motions, like I'm invisible." "Nay, and Jason made you feel visible," he said bitterly, his hands balling into fists at his sides. I didn't answer, because he was right. Jason had seen me in a way I hadn't felt seen in years, and no matter how wrong it had filled a void I couldn't ignore. Sam's voice softened, but the hurt in it was unmistakable. "I loved you, Emily. I still do. And this is how you repay me?" "I love you too," I said, tears streaming down my face. "But love doesn't fix everything. I wish it did, but it doesn't." For a long moment, the room was silent, except for the sound of my ragged breaths. Sam looked at me like I was a stranger, someone he didn't recognize anymore. "I can't do this right now," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. He turned and walked out, leaving me alone in the suffocating quiet of our bedroom. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, the weight of my choices pressing down on me. The bracelet on my wrist seemed to mock me, its silver charm gleaming in the dim light. Jason had given it to me as a symbol of something forbidden and fleeting, but now it felt like a chain, binding me to the consequences of everything I had done. And yet, even in the wreckage of my marriage, a part of me couldn't regret the way Jason had made me feel. It was a truth I wasn't ready to face, but one that refused to be ignored. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting sharp angles across the room. I sat at the edge of the bed, my hands trembling in my lap. The house was eerily silent, the kind of quiet that follows a storm. I had spent the night replaying Sam's expression over and over, the mixture of betrayal and heartbreak etched on his face. It was a look I'd never forget. I didn't hear Sam come into the room until he spoke. Jason needs to leave. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind of stillness that comes from sheer effort to contain something explosive. I turned to look at him, my heart sinking at the determination in his eyes. Sam! I began, but he held up a hand to stop me. No, Emily. Don't. I've made up my mind. His jaw tightened as he stepped closer. He's my brother, but he crossed a line. And so did you. I felt the weight of his words like a physical blow, but there was no room to argue. He was right, and nothing I said could change that. Sam turned and walked out of the room without waiting for a response, leaving me sitting there, paralyzed by the inevitability of what was coming. The confrontation happened in the living room, with Jason standing by the window, arms crossed, and Sam pacing like a caged animal. I stood nearby, unsure whether I should intervene or stay silent. You need to go, Sam said, his voice firm but low, like he was trying to keep himself from shouting. Jason turned to face him, his expression unreadable. I'm not running away because you're angry. Angry? Sam let out a bitter laugh. You don't get to downplay this, Jason. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. Jason's gaze didn't waver. And you think this is all on me. You don't even see what's been happening right under your nose. You've been so wrapped up in your work, so blind to what Emily needed. Don't you dare, Sam snapped, his voice rising. Don't you dare try to put this on me. I'm not putting it on you, Jason said, his tone sharp but controlled. But you can't pretend you didn't play a part in this. Their words cut through the air like knives, and I felt the tears sting my eyes as the weight of everything they were saying settled on me. This wasn't just about the two of them. This was about me, my choices, my failures, my inability to face what I truly wanted. You think you're the hero here, Jason? Sam continued, his voice cracking. You think sweeping in and filling the gaps makes you better than me? You're nothing but a selfish coward. Jason stepped closer, his jaw clenched. And you're so perfect, aren't you? You built a life so neat and tidy, you didn't even notice when it started to fall apart. Stop! My voice broke through their argument, startling them both. They turned to look at me, their faces raw with emotion. This isn't helping, I said, my voice trembling. Blaming each other isn't going to fix anything. Sam shook his head, his shoulders slumping. Maybe not, but one thing's clear. Jason can't stay here. Jason's eyes met mine then, searching for something I couldn't define. What do you want, Emily? The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked between the two of them. Sam, my husband, who had given me years of stability and love, and Jason, who had awakened something in me I hadn't realized was missing. I don't know, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what I want. Jason's expression softened, but there was a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Then I'll make it easier for you. He turned to Sam. I'll leave. No, Jason, I said, stepping forward. This isn't just about you leaving. This is about all of us. Sam's face hardened. Then decide, Emily. Him or me. The ultimatum hit like a punch to the gut. I felt the walls closing in, the weight of their expectations threatening to crush me. My mind raced, but no clear answer came. How could I choose between the life I had built and the one I had only glimpsed? The silence stretched on, thick and unbearable. Finally, Jason grabbed his bag from the corner of the room. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said, his voice low but steady. He walked past me without another word, the door closing behind him with a finality that made my chest ache. Sam didn't say anything. He stood there, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for something. An apology, an explanation, a sign that we could somehow move past this. But I had nothing to give. "I need time," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I can't. I can't make this decision right now." Sam nodded slowly, his face a mask of resignation. "Take all the time you need, Emily. But don't expect everything to be the same when you figure it out." That night, I sat alone in the living room, the silence of the house pressing down on me. Jason was gone, and Sam had retreated to the guest room, leaving me to confront the mess I had made. The bracelet on my wrist felt cold and foreign now, its presence a reminder of the choices I had yet to make. The story didn't end here. Not for me, not for any of us. But for now, all I had was the silence and the uncertainty of what would come next. And maybe, in that silence, I would find the answers I was too afraid to face.